WNBA star Brittney Griner is still detained in Russia. So is former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. This evening, President Biden met with both of their families. He spoke separately with Mrs. Griner's wife and Mr. Whelan's sister. This was the first time the president met with these families in person. He spoke with them on the phone in July. The White House says today's meeting was to assure the families that these cases are front of mind for the president. And John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council, confirmed that the U.S. has made an offer to Russia.
We have made a serious offer to get Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan back home. The Russians have not responded to that offer, but that doesn't mean that we're not still in negotiations and we're not still trying.
NBC News confirmed in July that the U.S. offered to exchange the two Americans for Viktor Bout, a convicted Russian arms dealer. We don't know if the current offer is the same or different. Paul Whelan is serving a 16-year sentence in a Russian prison. He has been detained since 2018 on spying charges, which he has denied. Brittney Griner is serving a 9-year sentence. She was arrested at a Moscow airport back in February, then detained on drug smuggling and possession charges. Authorities say she was carrying cannabis vape cartridges. She testified that her doctor prescribed them. NBC senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins us now with more. Kelly, what do we know about the president's meetings today?
Well, one of the most important things is that the president was involved. And by that, I mean giving a part of the president's schedule, time, FaceTime with the president, really elevates these two cases of Paul Whelan and Brittney Griner to a new level when it comes to trying to send a message to these families. So that's important. Also, Jake Sullivan, the president's national security advisor, was involved in this, meeting first with the Whelan family, so that's the sister of Paul Whelan, and then second, Brittney Griner's wife and her agent in her sports career. So that's what we know at this point from the White House. This is the kind of thing that is so sensitive because if they say too much, there is a concern about elevating both of these already prominent Americans on another level that could make effectively the price for bringing them home go even higher. But at the same time, they want to show a respect and a priority to the families who are frustrated, who have been suffering, who have been wanting help from the administration. So today, having that one-on-one time with the president is clearly very important. At the same time, the administration has told us that they do not have a specific breakthrough to share with these families. They have done a negotiation with the Russians. They have made an offer, and there has not been enough progress yet to suggest that there is a date when they can bring Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan home. So what happens today is the kind of thing where the president can listen to the concerns of these loved ones. He can share what he may know that is privately happening behind the scenes, which we are not privy to. And then we'll see what happens if the families want to say something publicly after they have a chance to digest what went on in the meeting. So it's significant. It's important. What it will tell us might take a little time to unravel. Joshua?
Kelly, do we have any sense, and no is a perfectly legitimate answer in this case because both sides have been rather tight-lipped, but do we have any sense of what a serious, effective proposal might look like to resolve this situation?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is what has been discussed publicly. And again, they're limited about that because these are fragile negotiations, and the desire is to get a successful outcome to bring these two Americans home. So the U.S. has offered to release Viktor Bout, who is a Russian arms dealer who's in the custody of the United States, to bring home these two Americans. What we have learned from our reporting and our colleagues like Andrea Mitchell, who's been doing so much of the work on this story, is that the Russians view this as wanting parity. 2 Russians for 2 Americans. And where could those negotiations go? What other Russians are held by the United States who could be a part of a trade? Beyond that, what other terms, what other timeline, we don't know. But certainly the United States has said they've made a serious offer. They believe it is a legitimate offer to have someone of the significance of this arms dealer to be traded for 2 people that the United States argues are wrongfully detained to get them back home. Brittney Griner is a gold medalist, an Olympian, a professional athlete. Paul Whelan, former Marine, has been detained for about 4 years now. His family has been waiting a very long time. Brittney Griner's family, most of this year, has been in anguish over their separation from her. So the United States feels it's made a concrete, significant offer. What will it take to get this done? That we don't yet know. Will putting them on the level of having a one-on-one presidential meeting also put pressure on the Russians to act? That could be something that we'll have to see. How do we measure that in the days ahead? As is obvious to any of our viewers, U.S.-Russian relations right now are at a difficult point with the war in Ukraine. Joshua?
Well, and to further that a bit, Kelly, before I let you go, Sergei Lavrov, who's the Russian foreign minister, kind of the equivalent to our Secretary of State, has been granted a visa to attend the UN General Assembly here in New York. And that starts up in earnest next week. I wonder how the timing of all of this might affect this and whether the UN General Assembly might influence these talks.
Well, certainly an opportunity to have any kind of direct contact is an opportunity that if the United States thinks they can capitalize on that, that may be advantageous. The UN General Assembly meetings do present those kinds of sometimes very subtle, out of the direct sort of scope of the camera. There are certainly big, high-profile speeches, but there are also chances to have meetings on the sideline when world leaders are here, and even world leaders who are the subject of a lot of controversy right now, which would be anyone from Russia. So there's potential there. President Biden, of course, is going tomorrow to the United Kingdom with the First Lady for the events related to Queen Elizabeth's funeral and farewell, and then he will be participating at the United Nations General Assembly. And until he gets back, certainly Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, and other top officials will be in New York for the UN, and perhaps there is more opportunity to have these kinds of conversations.
And so far from the administration, what we've been told is that there's nothing scheduled, but Secretary Blinken has said anything could happen. That still remains a possibility, but there's nothing on the calendar, at least not yet. Thank you, Kelly. That is NBC senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell starting us off tonight. Let's continue now with Donald Jensen. He's the director for Russia and Europe at the United States Institute of Peace. Mr. Jensen, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I can imagine if it was my loved one who was locked in a Russian prison, that I might tell President Biden, with all due respect, don't call me until you have some news. I don't want to hear how important we are to you. I don't want to hear how this is top of mind for you. They're in a Russian jail. Do something and call me when there's progress. What is the significance of having a meeting with the...
Well, as you probably have here in this process, for ignoring and not being active enough in dealing with the case. I think that's unfair, but it's understandable that the families might do as you suggest. The fundamental problem here is that the Griner incarceration in particular is the prisoner of the absolute frozen character of the bilateral relationship. And unless that improves, I think it's highly unlikely that there will be a deal to get her and Mr. Whelan freed. You have to remember that if Lavrov next week announces a deal, that is a sign from the Kremlin that they want a better relationship with the United States. And everything you see, press, official comment, and other things suggest that the Russians are not interested at the moment in having a better relationship with Washington as long as they support Ukraine. So I think while the longer prospects are that both Griner and Whelan will be freed, I think right now it's going to be really a tough sell for those reasons. Moreover, there's not a moral equivalence, obviously, between Victor Bout, who's a nasty character, and these other people that the Kremlin has said by the press to want freed, KGB officers and so forth. There's not a moral equivalence at all. So the president, understandably, the families are concerned, Griner and Whelan, but it's a very difficult thing to sell right now at this moment. And we'll see what happens in New York next week. I'm not particularly optimistic at the moment that much will happen because Putin does not want to send a message that he wants to work with the United States, even on humanitarian cases such as this.
And I should be fair, you know, the families had been kind of clamoring for a meeting with the president, saying that the optics of this would send a signal to the world and to Russia that this really was of a higher priority, as opposed to sending lower level operatives or even more senior officials who were not the president. But what about all of that? I take your point in terms of the larger relationship and that Griner and Whelan are kind of caught up in the mix of everything else. With the UN General Assembly, again, we don't know of any meetings that are scheduled, but what do you think the prospects are there? I mean, in terms of how Russia has been responding to the West regarding the war in Ukraine. He just had this meeting with China's President Xi Jinping in this kind of a secondary group that was set up to kind of compete with Western influence. I don't know if there's any signs of hope there in terms of the short-term diplomatic relationship.
Well, Joshua, I would like to disagree with you, but I agree. There's not a lot of signs of hope. The war has not gone well for Putin. He's under a lot of criticism now at home for the first time. The Chinese even did not embrace him, as a lot of people thought that they would this week. But at the working level where I served, and when I served in Moscow, this case is brought up almost every day in the bilateral relationship. And there is daily work being done between the two countries. But without the signal from the top, in this case, Putin, nothing will happen. And I'm not particularly optimistic at the moment that something will happen soon. Down the road, perhaps. But the Russians are very good negotiators. They want to link this to other things. And they're very, very angry at the U.S. and the West for helping Ukraine. And anything that looks like progress and the Kremlin compromising is not going to go down well with some of the people in Moscow who are criticizing Putin so strongly for a failed war effort so far. And that's what he's in. That's what he's facing. And the Griner case, as I said, gets wrapped into all these other considerations, especially the poor performance of the Russian military, and especially the growing criticism by the hard right in Moscow of Putin's leadership. And that's going to increase. And that makes the chances of a deal on Griner and Whelan not as promising as it might seem. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen right now.
So help me to think like a diplomat, right? Help me to think like someone who has to deal with people with a lot at stake and often with very high egos and a lot of face that they need to save. Does a deal have to involve something that allows Vladimir Putin to come away looking like the good guy, smelling like roses, like he didn't give up anything, but that he's doing something that matches the image of his wisdom and strength and magnanimity, and he never has to say he's sorry? Like, is that, I don't know how much diplomats have to think that way, but does that have to be part of a deal at this point in order for Griner and Whelan to get out anytime soon, to let Vladimir Putin, to let it really feel like a win-win for Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, that's how the boss might think. But I think Putin has no interest in looking like a good guy. He's looking for an equivalent deal from Washington at a time when he's under severe pressure from his right flank for what's going on in Ukraine. That's going to make a deal very hard to get. And if he does a deal on Griner and Whelan, he's got to show that his right flank, that he's not hurting Russia. And frankly, being nice to the U.S. right now is not a popular stance to have.
How concerned, before I got to let you go, how concerned should we be for the safety of Brittney Griner and Paul Whelan? I imagine it doesn't do Putin any favors to allow them to be harmed behind bars, but how much, if at all, should we be concerned for their welfare?
I think they will be kept at a minimum level of subsistence. Russian prisons are horrible, often, as you know. And I think she's going to be not allowed to get sick or ill. Same with Whelan. But beyond that, we're not going to have a minimum security situation here. Russian culture, the role of the prisons in Russian society, which often has a political character, is something that's traditionally very, very crude and tough. But they will make sure that she makes the minimum health standards, I have no doubt. They want a trade to go forward with both sides getting people returned who are relatively in decent health. But beyond that, I would not go.
Donald Jensen of the U.S. Institute of Peace, I appreciate you thinking this through with us tonight. Thank you very much. Tonight's headlines begin with a gruesome discovery in Ukraine. Fair warning, these images might be disturbing. They clearly disturbed the Ukrainians who found them. It is a mass grave near the city of Izium, apparently with hundreds of bodies. Izium is in Kharkiv. The governor of Kharkiv says that many of the bodies were children with their hands tied behind their backs. Investigators say some of the corpses appear to have been tortured. NBC's Erin McLaughlin has more.
Well, it's an absolutely horrific find, according to Ukrainian officials, in the town of Izium, which is outside of the second largest city in Ukraine, Kharkiv. They have uncovered a mass grave of more than 400 bodies. Most of those bodies, they say, belong to civilians, all of them practically bearing the hallmarks of a violent death, some bearing the signs of torture, many, according to Ukrainian officials, belonging to children. Tonight, Ukrainian officials are absolutely outraged. President Zelensky calling for justice for the victims, saying that Russia must be held accountable for its atrocities. Russia, for its part, blaming Ukraine, saying the mass grave is a Ukrainian fabrication. But this was discovered by Ukrainian authorities after they pushed into the area, pushing out Russian military, which had been occupying the area for some 6 months. They managed to push them out of hundreds of towns and villages in the Kharkiv Oblast, including one village not far from Izium. We were there speaking to residents, one man telling me what it was like when the Russians arrived during the Russian occupation. They cut off his village's electricity, they cut off gas, they also cut off any contact to the outside world, no cell phone, no internet, no way to let loved ones know that they were alive, how they were doing. And he described for me with tears in his eyes the moment when Ukrainian soldiers arrived announcing that their village was free. It is a glimpse of relief in an otherwise very bleak and ongoing war. Back to you.
That was NBC's Erin McLaughlin reporting. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands are under a tropical storm warning tonight. Forecasters are watching Tropical Storm Fiona. But how close will it get to the eastern U.S.? NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has the latest forecast. Hey, Bill.
Joshua, here's the latest on Fiona. And we have to remember, it was 5 years ago that we had a Category 5 Hurricane Maria move right over the top of Puerto Rico. So, any storm, if you get, it's almost like you go through an experience like that. You just hear another storm's coming, it kind of scares you. This isn't mean nothing like that. Doesn't mean we're not going to have some power outages. Doesn't mean we're not going to have some life-threatening weather, but nothing compared to that huge disaster. So here's the latest on Fiona. Winds are right around 50 miles per hour. So that kind of puts it in the middle ground. It's not a weak tropical storm. It's not a strong wind either. It's kind of right in the middle. And we think it could possibly get a little bit stronger by the time it gets to Puerto Rico. Hurricane, unlikely, but it still has about 36 hours till it gets closest to the island. So here's the warnings and watches that we have up now. So areas from St. Kitts and Nevis, Virgin Islands, British and U.S. and Puerto Rico, all under tropical storm warnings. The Dominican Republic will go under a tropical storm warning eventually, but right now it's a tropical storm watch. And the red line shows you kind of the center path. It may go a little north or south of that, but you see the northern, the dirty side of the storm, the stronger winds will go over Puerto Rico. So that's why we could have some minor power outages from the wind. And then the other issue is usually the northern side and the western side of the storm, the eastern side of the storm is where you have the heaviest rainfall, and that's going to be the case too. So here's our rainfall forecast. And when you see the colors up here, the orange is 5 inches, this maroonish color is 7 inches of rain. So you see this huge swath of at least 7 inches of rain, kind of follows the center line and a little bit to the north of it. And you notice all of the southern half of Puerto Rico is the potential for at least 7 inches. And if they're in some of the mountainous terrain, it could get up to a foot. So that could be significant life-threatening mudslides, debris flows, and flash flooding because of that. San Juan looks like likely around 4 to 6 inches of rain. So for the city itself, that's going to leave a lot of ponding of water. So that could be an issue too. So this is all going to be as we go through this weekend, especially as we go through Saturday and then Sunday. And then eventually by Monday, the rain will move away and it'll be over the top of the Dominican Republic. So where does it go after that? The last couple of days, some of our computers were kind of scaring the East Coast a little bit, maybe Florida, maybe the Outer Banks, maybe out on Cape Cod. The Hurricane Center forecast goes out 5 days from now. So that takes us into Wednesday, somewhere near the Turks and Caicos, the areas maybe brushing the Bahamas. Then the Hurricane Center thinks it could be getting stronger too, up to a Category 1. The mountainous terrain of the Dominican Republic will keep it kind of weak until then. Then it will strengthen starting probably Monday night into Tuesday. And then after this, what happens after 7 days from now? Well, we have our computer models that can take this out even further, and this is all the way till next Friday night. And notice the turn. Yesterday, a lot of these lines were kind of squiggly and some were bending back towards Florida. Not the case anymore. All of these are kind of drifting north and then away. Bermuda has to watch this closely. Could even be a stronger hurricane by the time it gets near Bermuda. But the Outer Banks, Florida, the bottom line is you have to watch this. But right now, you don't need to make any preparations. And this is one of our computers that gives us about 70 different possibilities between the GFS, the American computer, and the European. And all of the squiggly lines avoid the U.S., Joshua. And that's the way we want to keep it this weekend.
We do indeed. Thank you, Bill. That's NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns with the forecast. Hispanic Heritage Month kicks off today with a celebration of Mexican Independence Day. No, that's not Cinco de Mayo. From our colleagues at LX News, Andy Resendiz has the story.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Did you know that Mexico Independence Day isn't actually on Cinco de Mayo? In fact, it is on September 16th. But why do people celebrate it on the 5th of May? Well, están un poco confundidos. They're a bit confused. But don't worry, I got you. May 5th, 1862, marks the Mexican Army's victory over France at the Battle of Puebla during the French-Mexican War. Thus, the famous Cinco de Mayo was born. Pero ¿cómo? How did it become such a big thing in the United States? Buena pregunta. Great question. In the 1960s, Chicano activists raised awareness of the holiday because they identified with the victory of indigenous Mexicans over European invaders during the Battle of Puebla. Today, the occasion is celebrated with parades, mariachi, traditional food, folklorico, all things Mexican. Funny thing is that in Mexico, it's not widely celebrated. The celebration mostly occurs in the state of Puebla, where Zaragoza's victory occurred. In all other parts, May 5th is just any other day. It's not even recognized as a federal holiday. Mexico independence was actually claimed more than 50 years before the Battle of Puebla. Pero ¿por qué? But why is Día de la Independencia commemorated on September 16th? September 16th, 1810, a cool priest, Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, became the father of Mexican independence after he made a declaration called Grito de Dolores, which launched an 11-year struggle that ended 300 years of Spanish colonial rule. Mexico won its independence from Spain and formed its unique Mexican identity. Now, the anniversary is celebrated as the country's birthday. So next time someone says Happy Mexico Independence Day and it's not September 16th, sit them down and let them know that they have the wrong date.
Coming up, Venezuelan migrants are finding shelter in Cape Cod. They were flown and bussed north by Republican governors. More on the political battle over immigration and the people caught in the middle when we come back. A group of mostly Venezuelan migrants is in Cape Cod tonight. They were in Martha's Vineyard yesterday. Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis unexpectedly sent them there by plane. Today, he vowed to keep doing it.
I mean, these are voluntary transportation that they're signing up for, but they're given a good ride, they're given everything, and that's just, you know, it's a humane thing to do. And these are just the beginning efforts. I mean, we've got an infrastructure in place now. There's going to be a lot more that's happening.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott has made a similar move. Both he and Governor DeSantis blame President Biden for the large number of migrants coming over the southern border. They claim to be shifting the burden onto Democratic-leaning states. Today, the White House called their actions reckless and shameful.
Yesterday, 2 Republican governors reportedly lured 100 asylum seekers, including children, onto planes and buses with false premises and then abandoned them on the side of a busy road thousands of miles away with nothing but Ziploc bags of their belongings in hand.
CNBC's Perry Russum has more on this political battle and the migrants at the center of it.
The migrants' journey from South America has taken them by foot, plane, bus, and now ferry. Their stay at a small church on Martha's Vineyard is over. Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker says they are voluntarily going to Joint Base Cape Cod, home to 5 military commands, and now an emergency shelter. Questions remain over how much the migrants were told about their flight to the island. Pedro, in the blue jacket, says he did not know they were going to Martha's Vineyard. This man says when the plane landed, he thought, now what do we do?
They had a map of the airport and a map and a direct line to Martha's Vineyard Community Services. That's how they found us.
Do you think these people, these migrants who came here, truly understood and knew where they were going on that plane?
Yes, they thought they were going to Boston.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is taking credit for the planes. Today he calls accusations of the migrants being lured totally false.
I mean, these are voluntary transportation that they're signing up for, but they're given a good ride. They're given everything.
In signing the state's budget this summer, DeSantis allocated $12 million to a new program facilitating the transport of unauthorized aliens out of the state. The governor discussing the plan nearly a year ago.
If you sent to Delaware or Martha's Vineyard or some of these places, that border would be secure the next day.
Mark Kaplan has lived on Martha's Vineyard for decades.
I think he's misreading the population of Martha's Vineyard.
Mike Hegarty has built homes on the island for 25 years.
I think he was looking for our reaction.
This couple moved here months ago.
It's kind of backfiring from what he originally intended.
The immigrant situation is a real and prevalent one.
What would happen if another plane landed here in Martha's Vineyard filled with migrants?
We would come together as a community and probably do the same.
And remember, these are migrants coming from Texas, not Florida. Governor DeSantis says he has $12 million to use, and he will use every penny. He says there will be more buses and possibly more flights. Back to you.
That's CNBC's Perry Russum reporting from Martha's Vineyard. Let's continue now with Michelle Hackman. She covers immigration policy and homeland security for the Wall Street Journal. Ms. Hackman, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
How did we get to this point? There's been a lot that's gone on with immigration over the last few years, for sure. COVID affected the immigration conversation partially. The shift in presidential administrations affected the conversation. But can we draw a through line from what we just saw on Martha's Vineyard to some causal point in the past that kind of explains how we got here?
Yeah, I think what's going on is that, obviously border crossings have gone up. They're at record levels. And, Republican governors feel like this is a really good issue for them to focus on. Immigration is a top issue for Republican base voters. It's a weak spot for Biden. And so any way they can highlight it is a net positive for them. I think polling shows that Texas voters love it. Florida voters love it. So these crazy stunts really work well for them.
How much, if at all, do Governors Abbott and DeSantis have a point about the nature of immigration policy? Granted, some immigration policies just kind of roll over from administration to administration, but how much do they have a point that the Biden administration maybe does bear at least a measure of the responsibility for what's happening on the southern border?
I think the point that is worth making is that these southern border states, do bear the brunt of these border crossings. They're the ones responsible for paying for a lot of the transport, for a lot of the shelter space. And they're saying, hey, rest of country, hey, Washington, pay attention to us. We really need your help. And I think, Abbott was saying, Washington, if you're not going to pay attention to us, we're going to send the migrants to you. And they're pretty effectively making that point now.
Help me understand what they're referring to when they say pay attention to us. In the last few years, there's been a lot of attention paid on the nations of the so-called Northern Triangle, through which migrants flow on their way to Mexico and then on to Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. There's also been more negotiation diplomatically with the Mexican government to try to put more pressure on Mexico's southern border to prevent the flow of migrants before it gets to the U.S. border. What additional attention are Governors Abbott and DeSantis actually asking for?
You're right that, under Trump during the surge, actually more migrants were released into the country in 2019 than under Biden's first year in 2021. So some of this is obviously political. They're saying, pay attention to us because it's politically advantageous for us to complain about this. But I think where they have a point is, Texas, Arizona, these states are footing a lot of the bill. for actually taking care of these people during COVID. They were paying for a lot of COVID testing. They were saying, hey, federal government, this is a federal problem. Immigration is you guys are responsible for immigration. You need to give us more money. And I think that they're actually pretty effectively making that point when you have Eric Adams and Muriel Bowser in Washington saying the same thing.
So if the funding that the federal government was providing to support Texas, let's just use them as an example, in dealing with the inflow of migrants across the border was higher, if Texas was getting more federal support, presumably that would satisfy Governor Abbott somewhat?
Or let's say if FEMA was stepping in a little bit more. I think one point that I've often observed as an immigration reporter is that the smoother that the processing of migrants goes, the fewer times you're seeing random drop-offs of migrants in Texas border towns at bus stations where people are sort of left to fend for themselves and sometimes don't know where they're going. The smoother that process goes and people don't notice what's going on, the less immigration becomes an issue. And so it's really a matter of, investing in that coordination.
I'm glad you mentioned that because yesterday as I was looking at Governor DeSantis' remarks, I'm from Florida, I'm from South Florida, and there are many enclaves in parts of Miami-Dade County and to an extent Broward County in Central Florida, where if you come from Venezuela or Colombia or Ecuador, certainly from Cuba, other parts of the Caribbean, you're able to find like the local Ecuadorian restaurant and get a bite to eat and ask about a job and people kind of know you. So there are all these other ways where people can enter the country and sort of be absorbed in ways that I think have a very different outcome than, say, interdicting people at the border, rounding them up on a bus and then sending them somewhere. How much are we even having an apples-to-apples conversation between Texas and Florida about their individual situations with people crossing either a land or a sea border? I mean, are they arguing for the same thing?
I think that you're making a good point where Texas, I think to some extent has a point where they're saying, these people don't want to be in Texas anyway. Ron DeSantis is saying a lot of these people do want to come to Florida. A lot of the people we're seeing crossing the border right now, you were mentioning different nationalities, are actually coming from Venezuela, some from Cuba. That's a really new phenomenon on the border. And a lot of those communities are actually in Florida. And once you actually get to Florida, and you've probably experienced this, is there's a huge Cuban community in Florida, a huge Venezuelan community. And as soon as people arrive, they sort of blend into the community. So it's a matter of sort of picking them out at the border before they arrive.
Right. And before I have to let you go, and by the way, I only picked Ecuadorian just as a for example, just because South Florida is so very, very diverse across the Latin diaspora.
Coming too. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Before I let you go, what's the next step in all of this, you think? What should we be keeping an eye out for in the next few days and weeks?
Oh, I think this is just going to keep escalating. Ron DeSantis has $12 million. We know if we're going to keep seeing planes landing in Martha's Vineyard, New York to DC to Chicago to other sort of liberals, and I think given all the attention they're getting.
Michelle Hackman of the Wall Street Journal, appreciate you talking this through with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
These days, more transgender athletes are being locked out of school sports, but one of the country's premier marathons is creating a new category in the name of inclusion. We'll discuss it with a gender non-binary runner before we go. At least 18 states have passed laws banning transgender women or girls from school sports. This week, the Boston Marathon made a very different move. Organizers announced that runners will have the option to register as gender non-binary for next year's race. Joining us now to discuss this move is Jake Fedorowski, creator of the Guide to Non-Binary Inclusion in Running. Jake, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
First of all, Jake, may I ask, what pronouns do you use?
Yeah, my pronouns are they and them.
Would you explain for people who may be new to this topic, to this concept, what that means to you, to use they, them as your pronouns?
Sure. So it goes back to this separation of what is the sex assigned at birth and what is the gender identity of an individual. So my gender identity is non-binary, and that for me means that I am identifying outside of the gender binary of men and women. So there are elements of both genders that I will, incorporate into my identity, but I'm not identifying as a man or as a woman. I'm kind of completely outside of that gender binary.
What has that meant for you in terms of your involvement in running, dealing with people who are cisgender, like me, cisgender meaning their gender identity matches their assigned sex at birth, dealing with people who are cisgender and don't understand what it means to be transgender or gender non-binary? How has that been for you?
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I have, done a lot of educating of my fellow runners and those in the community when and where I can. It's really challenging, specifically when I'm registering for races, and that's where this news is so exciting. I have begun to register for these, or at the beginning when I was registering for races, I was having to choose between a men's division or a women's division. And so how, as a non-binary person who identifies outside of those two buckets, am I being, folded into this process, right? And what sort of space is being created for me? That's where this importance of creating space for non-binary individuals kind of comes into the equation. And with that comes a lot of pushback from people who maybe don't, affirm the non-binary gender identity. And for those who, might need a little bit more, education or information or resources, that's kind of where, my advocacy work comes into play.
Talk about what it will mean for runners like yourself to have runs like the Boston Marathon begin to allow a space for non-binary runners to be affirmed and to basically be noticed and included in the run. I understand that there's still some work to do in terms of figuring out qualifying times, the money for crossing the finish line first. Like, it's not quite on par with people who run in the men's and women's division, right?
Correct, yeah. So stepping into this work brings a level of responsibility to these races, because you're now creating a space where you're inviting non-binary folks into the event. And by doing that, you want to make sure that it's a space that celebrates those identities, that is, basically treating them the same or, equally as the men participants, the women participants. And so how is gender at play in your event, right? Do you have gendered restrooms? Are you giving out apparel that men's shirts or women's shirts? Are you using gendered language? Is your announcer at the event saying, "Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2023 so-and-so marathon," right? There are so many areas where gender is at play, and we as a society, we as an industry have to start to pull back that layer of gender and start to think about how can we be more inclusive. And this goes into, as you were saying, the awards and prize money, all those things that we think about for the men's and women's divisions need to be addressed and be made available for those in the non-binary division.
I know I got to let you go in a minute, but I wonder if you could help me kind of educate some folks, again, who are very new to this, especially people who don't run. I am not a runner. If I tried to do a marathon, my whole focus would not be on, frankly, the identities of anyone around me. It would be on trying not to die. So for people who are new to this, especially in the running community, give me an example of something that they might bear in mind, consider, think about, consider doing differently if they are going to engage in issues of gender more thoughtfully, perhaps for the first time. Is there like a common landmine that you would recommend they not step on?
Yeah, what I try to push for folks is that as you start to do this work, the biggest thing I can recommend, there are two things I can recommend. One is to educate yourself, right? Find resources such as my guide to non-binary inclusion in running, or Google. Find those ways that you can start to educate yourself on the experience of those who may not identify as men and women. But in addition, to also find those ways to kind of check yourself and start to realize the moments in which you are making assumptions, right? We think of runners all the time and like, oh, we see a runner with a ponytail, or we see a runner with a pink shirt or pink shoes, so it must be a woman, right? Or we see a runner who's got really short buzzed hair and, you know, the t-shirt and maybe some longer shorts. Oh, that's a man.
Right.
Is that really a man? Is that really a woman? How do you know? And what assumptions are you making just on, you know, the way, or just by a way that someone is, presenting themselves at that event? So the more that we can do to kind of refrain from making those assumptions, the better.
Jake Fedorowski, author of The Guide to Non-Binary Inclusion in Running. Thanks for making time for us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
I would love to hear from you on this or anything we covered tonight. Send us an email, leave us a voicemail, or hit us up on social. We are at NBC Now Tonight. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.